All right, so in English, we really like to categorize literature. It's a way of systematizing and bringing together books that are alike, but also different. It's actually not that much different than what scientists do, like biologists, where they go, this is an example of a cat, this is an example of a dog. Even though, as we know, like a pug and a wolf are completely different creatures. Now, with that in mind, we often use the term genre to categorize our different kinds of literature. So, in this video today, I'm going to explain for you what genre is, mostly using a bit of a commercial and pop culture lens.
So let's start with our first question. How do we define genre? I really love John Frau's discussion of genre in his book, appropriately entitled Genre. He has two definitions that I think are really useful for this class. First, he argues that genre is a form of symbolic action, the generic organization of language, images, gestures, and sounds that makes things happen by actively shaping the way we understand the world. He later states that genre is a set of conventional and highly organized constraints on the production and interpretation of meaning. Okay, so what do those definitions mean in regular English? Genres are conventions of writing or communication more generally that 1. Guide our writing process, 2. Help our audience interpret or understand our ideas as they're being communicated, and 3. Guide our own reading process. Now, I want to note that there are all kinds of genres, fictional and non-fictional, and genres in all kinds of mediums. Now, I also want to note that each genre generally has a set of formal conventions. These guide our audience's expectations, but they're also these ideas and concepts that can be engaged with or deviated from or combined with others. Think of these conventions like rules, or maybe even signposts on a map that guide the reader where you want them to go. So, for some examples, there are literary genres like science fiction, fantasy, and realism. There are film genres like superhero films. I'm a huge MCU fan, for example. There's film noir, and then there's rom-coms. There are also nonfiction genres like memoirs or news reports, or even the research papers that you write for your classes. So I want to return to the metaphor of the map because when in doubt, I love explaining concepts through metaphors and will push them as absolutely far as possible. Now, an author has a general idea of where they want to push the reader, where they want them to go. It's kind of like a road trip. You're traveling through this text in order to get to a particular ending. Now, if the author follows a general map, in other words, the generic rules and expectations, the audience will be easily led through the text. They'll understand the general points the author is making, and they'll understand the tropes and the themes a little more easily. Now, granted, if an author follows the roadmap too closely, it might be really boring. So, think about driving down the same road that you've been 1,000 times. This is rarely thrilling. And so authors often play with expectations, kind of like if you went off-roading or if you took a surprise detour to visit the world's largest ball of string, which is apparently in Cawker City, Kansas. That being said, if they play with the rules and it's done badly, the audience might get lost or confused about the text's goals. Although, I want to be honest, the audience won't have one given response because each reader brings their own expectations and experiences to the text as well, and no author can prepare for that. Okay, so how does this play out in real life? For example, if you're writing a research paper, you generally want to guide your reader to a particular conclusion. You want them to agree with your argument. And there are certain conventions of the research genre, like a thesis statement, providing evidence, using topic sentences at the beginning of your paragraphs, and including an intro and conclusion. These provide a literal map for your reader so they can understand the nuances and contours of your argument and then also ultimately agree with you. Now, alternatively, in fiction, when we read a fantasy novel, we might generally expect magic, but that magic might look different depending on the subgenre that we're looking at. For example, an urban fantasy novel tends to have a lot of werewolves or vampires or fairies, but they exist in an often contemporary setting, usually in the city. Gothic novels, on the other hand, are filled with ghosts and horrific scenes, and they're often set in castles far, far away from town. Now, the sword and sorcery subgenre is filled with buff warriors fighting wizards and dragons. Think of Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then there's also fairy tales with royalty and sort of miller's sons trying to marry a princess or princes trying to undo a fairy's curse. Harry Potter is actually known as a portal fantasy, another subgenre, and one of the basic tenets of a portal fantasy includes that the protagonist must travel through a portal to reach a magical world. While the formal expectations of the genre are vast and complicated, and Farrell Mendelssohn, in her book Rhetorics of Fantasy, breaks a lot of them down. But in this case, you can think of Platform 9 3/4 or The Wall Hagrid Opens into Diagon Alley as examples of that portal, as both lead Harry Potter from the Muggle world to the magical world. Genres, however, can also give us a set of realities or ways of interpreting the world, which Frau calls, quote, ontological domains, end quote. Now, ontological domains are, quote, the implicit realities that genres form as a pre-given reference, together with the effects of authority and plausibility, which are specific to the genre. So, as an example of what that means, if we were to turn to the coming-of-age genre, those realities, those ways of looking at the world are really the rules and expectations coming-of-age narratives posit about the experience of growing up. They play on our expectations of what childhood looks like and what adolescence looks like and what adult responsibilities and adulthood looks like. And so with this in mind, I want to note that these expectations are going to look different depending on the culture that you grew up in. And in this case, particularly the symbolic associations that we make with any of those life stages, if they even exist within the culture you grow up in. Now, I also want to note that genres never exist in a vacuum, and neither does any single text. They always exist in relationship to each other, and we use the term intertextuality to refer to the relationships between texts and between genres. So a single text, a novel, a movie, a biography, might be in conversation with multiple other texts, and it shows it's starting that conversation by using allusions, parodies, satires, cliches, among other literary devices. For example, 2013's Frozen is most obviously an adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale, The Snow Queen, but the story itself has been heavily changed from the original text to be much more appealing to a contemporary audience. So, for example, in the original text, the Snow Queen is just straight evil, and Anna and Elsa, or the Snow Queen in this instance, are not related. Moreover, there is a really fantastic and strange robber girl who rescues Anna, and as you can probably guess, she's not in the story. I'm quite sad about this. Frozen is also deeply influenced by the American musical, and in particular by other Disney princess films, which honestly at this stage practically constitute their own genre at this point. Now, for instance, if we were to look at the former, the American musical, Olaf's In Summer Song owes most of its structure and its iconography to old vaudeville performances. So if we look at the hat, the cane, the dancing duo, the tap dancing in particular, this is really reminiscent of, for example, shows like Gene Kelly and Judy Garland's 1942 film For Me and My Gal. Although I want to note that they are actually playing on this dance style that was first popularized in the 1910s and the 1920s, which is when this film is set. Now, the song that Hans and Anna sing at the beginning, sort of right after or really during the ball, Love is an Open Door, this makes fun of how quickly Disney princesses fall in love. I mean, seriously, rewatch any Disney princess film pre-Frozen. I mean, we are talking about a few days or less for most of them. Some, like Snow White, for example, really do happen over a single song, the very thing that Love is an Open Door is making fun of. And if we go back to Snow White, the next time that they meet, she's supposedly dead. It's kind of creepy. Let's be real. But with this in mind, none of these moments in Frozen really work, or work nearly as well, if you don't have at least a passing familiarity with the various tropes and genres it's playing with. And it's important to recognize when those tropes construct our sense of how the world works. So, in more spoilery terms, I mean, seriously, I'm about to spoil the ending of Frozen. Anna is cursed, right? That's the main plot point here. And she can only be saved by true love's kiss. Now, for most of the movie, both the characters in the movie and the audience pretty much expects that kiss to come from Hans or later Kristoff. Fairy tales, Disney princess films, and let's be real, much of United States culture has, as an implicit reality or ontological domain, assumed that true love only exists between a man and a woman, and that this love is inherently and must be romantic. So, for instance, Disney's Snow White is a perfect example. Sleeping Beauty, both of them rely on true love's kiss as a plot device. And heck, even DreamWorks' Shrek, a fairy tale parody that pokes fun of Disney, normalizes true love's kiss by the end. But Frozen messes with that trope by making Elsa Anna's savior. Honestly, the fact that it's Elsa who saves her sister from freezing with true love's kiss has a much greater emotional weight if you really are expecting true love's kiss to come from a man. In other words, Frozen provides a potentially new ontological domain, or understanding of the world, by proposing that the most important relationship in a young woman's life could be with her sister instead of a man. Okay, I'm done with Frozen. In other words, I'm letting it go. Apologies. That was genuinely terrible. So, in short, I want to note that the texts we read aren't just going to exist as a part of one genre, but really they're going to play with and articulate the tropes of many different genres. And it's also important to know that genres are really historically situated and often change over time, particularly if certain elements or rules or guidelines become really dated or cliche. So, again, if we return to the Disney princess romance model, really most recent fairy tale adaptations have shifted to focus less on romance and focus more on the main character's roles as leader, like Moana, or to have a career, like in The Princess and the Frog.